to go across to Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner first. Colonel Lerner, I want to ask you about your battle plans and your own assessment 1 month on about how this war is shaping up from the IDF's perspective in terms of achieving your mission objectives. Are you on schedule, ahead of schedule, or do you think progress has been much slower than you would have liked it to?
Moving forward every day, it's getting closer and closer to our objective. Indeed, destroying and dismantling Hamas as a governing authority, as a terrorist army. At the end of this, they will no longer have that power or the ability to launch and strike and use the Gaza Strip as a staging ground against our people.
You may be able to kill the top Hamas military and political commanders, but the biggest question is how will you root out the ideology of the Hamas and the concern that each civilian who's killed, his relatives potentially become more and more hardline, and that the idea of the Hamas stays alive even if the military wing of the Hamas is destroyed by the Israel army?
No, the ideology isn't our challenge. The challenge is restoring safety and security to the people. This terrorist organization can never ever wield the powers of government to build a terrorist army that conduct, based on the powers of the government, the ability to brutally massacre, butcher, rape, behead, dismember, and abduct Israelis.
One of the biggest questions globally is about what happens in Gaza the day after being when the Israel Defense Forces have won militarily, established control once again over the Gaza Strip. Then have you started thinking seriously within the IDF about what happens next, who runs Gaza once the Hamas has been militarily vanquished?
Now, Israel does not want to rule Gaza. This has been, since day one, we've been saying this. We left Gaza in order not to return, but the security reality, the security regime that needs to change. Ideally, the Palestinians of Gaza would have to determine their own destiny of how they want to be ruled, but it cannot be with a terrorist entity that uses the powers of government in order to attack us and launch a war against us. The reality, of course, we understand it will be a long process. It won't be a short war. Because of the challenges of urban warfare, of a terrorist organization that has deeply embedded itself within the civilian arena, that is cynically exploiting the civilian arena to the benefit of its operations, of its ruthless, merciless operations. And this is precisely what we're up against. And so we understand it's going to be a long process, and there may be intermediate times that the IDF will control, secure, and make sure that Hamas can never have that power again. For Israel, I would say, especially in the aftermath of the massacre of October 7th, any security reality on the ground will be better than the one that existed on October the 6th.
One of the realities on the ground is that 240-odd Israeli citizens are still hostage with the Hamas, and we've seen continuing and increasing protests in different parts of Israel demanding that the government and the army do more to bring these hostages back to safety. How are you viewing these protests and the concerns about the IDF not doing enough to try and bring these Israeli hostages back home?
Hostages are one component of our war effort. The mission objective is to bring them home safely and securely. Hamas are responsible for their well-being. We have demanded that the International Committee of the Red Cross have access to them to assess their well-being. I'm not aware that that has happened yet. Of course, their presence in the Gaza Strip is an important component of our operational activities and planning. But I would say that we are utilizing all of the tools and capabilities that the IDF has in order to try and find, locate, and rescue. We've already rescued one of the hostages, Ori Megidish, from Hamas's hands, and indeed, there's a huge challenge that this will that this poses for any military. There's obviously also the diplomatic efforts, which are ongoing. Ultimately, Hamas have to release the hostages. They have to release them now.
Okay, that's what your expectation at least is. Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah spoke of all options being open, didn't indicate that the war would escalate, but said that's something the Hezbollah is ready for. How does the IDF view the prospect of a two-front or a three-front conflict?
Hezbollah needs to operate very cautiously. They need to watch very closely how we're dismantling and destroying Hamas in Gaza. Indeed, over the last month, we've seen increased activities on their behalf against us. Yesterday, an Israeli was killed in an exchange or in an attack that originated from southern Lebanon. Hezbollah needs to choose if they are a representative, a tool of Iran, or a representative or a tool of Lebanon. They have a huge impact on what happens in Lebanon. I think they need to decide who they listen to. And my message to the Lebanese government would be one of, you need to take control and take charge of what Hezbollah is doing on the south. They are jeopardizing the sanctity of Lebanon. And so, yes, there is a concern that there will be an escalation. We've seen an escalation over the last month. Hezbollah have conducted attacks with anti-tank guided missiles, rockets, mortars, sniper fire, machine gun fire, drones. All of these have happened in the last month. We are taking every necessary step in order to be strong in our defenses. So both evacuating people from the area, all of the towns and communities across the 5-kilometer radius from the border have been evacuated, and we've over 80% of the people have left. In the end of the day, we are reinforcing our forces on the ground, in the air and at sea. We've only less than half of our air forces utilized in the south against Hamas. So we have a strong capability to engage Hezbollah if necessary. We don't want to, but we are prepared to if need be.
One last question before I go across to our guests in India and the ambassador of the Palestinian Authority, Colonel Lerner. Massive pressure now on Israel to declare a humanitarian ceasefire. Anthony Blinken, the American Secretary of State, was in the Middle East, Jordan, Egypt, Qatar, all asking for Israel to pause hostilities to allow for a humanitarian ceasefire.
Anybody asking for a humanitarian ceasefire but not explicitly addressing the issue of hostages is their recommendations or appeals fall on empty ears here in Israel. Of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu said and echoed this yesterday. From our perspective, the humanitarian effort is part of our war effort. And indeed, we're creating evacuation corridors from north to south so that people can exit the north to go to a safer area in the south of Gaza Strip. We are making sure that the humanitarian assistance and aid continues to flow into Gaza from Rafah, and about 100 trucks now daily are coming in. This is part of the ongoing effort. And we're maintaining open channels with the international humanitarian organizations in order to mitigate the effects of the war. At the end of the day, this is a war, and we are determined to defeat Hamas, destroy their capabilities. And indeed, they have, as a governing authority, I think we've lost him.
For a Palestinian perspective, I want to go across to Hussam Said Zomlot, the ambassador of the Palestinian Authority to the United Kingdom. Mr. Zomlot, welcome. It's been 1 month since the Hamas's dastardly attack across Israel. Every single call that's been made to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for there to be some kind of a humanitarian ceasefire has been rejected. The IDF at this time determined not to stop till the time the Hamas has been wiped out. From a Palestinian perspective, how do you look at the last month and where we've reached so far, sir?
Well, right from the beginning of this, we have been warning the world that Israel, with its current prime minister and government, will only use what happened for a long-term plan of actually waging a war of genocide against the Palestinian people. And what has happened since the 7th of October proves that. Israel has been hysteric. We have heard genocidal rhetoric and discourse from Israel. And regrettably, some Western governments, primarily the US and the UK and others, have really at the beginning gave some sort of a green light for such an assault. And it was interpreted by those fanatics in the Israeli government as a carte blanche to do what they have been doing over the last month. This war of Israel is not against Hamas. This war of Israel is against the Palestinian people. As you know, more than 10,000 innocent civilians have lost their lives. Almost half of them are children. An utter destruction of homes, of hospitals, of schools, universities, utter destruction of the infrastructure. the unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe in every sense. The UN and UN agencies are telling us horrifying accounts of sheer human suffering. Hospitals are running out of generators and fuel and electricity. You have babies in incubators that might die because of these incubators running out of energy. And you're talking about the break out of diseases among populations. Israel has forced hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to leave their homes to the south under the pretext that the south is safe, yet they have been bombarding the south heavily, killing hundreds of Palestinian innocent civilians.
But Ambassador Zomlot, when leaders of the Hamas have been asked about, for example, something like tunnels, saying that, would civilians in Gaza get to use the tunnels? They've been reported to say, no, those tunnels are for Hamas fighters. The civilians are the responsibility of the United Nations. So it's not as if the Hamas, which is, for all practical purposes, the ruler of Gaza, has been wanting to take care of the Gazan civilians. They're only taking care of their military infrastructure and their fighters. They've left the civilians to their own mercy, so much so that in some cases civilians haven't been allowed to leave because the Hamas wanted some protection to save themselves from the IDF's attack.
You go and ask a Hamas spokesperson for that. I'm the wrong person to ask that question. However, the only ruler of Gaza is Israel. Israel fully occupies Gaza. It decides who comes in, who comes out. It decides even the level of food, water, electricity, telecommunication, internet, what have you. And Gaza has been under draconian siege by Israel for the last 16 years. And therefore, Israel is in a state of full military occupation of Gaza, the West Bank and East Jerusalem, as per international consensus for the last 56 years. Now, as an occupier, Israel has the responsibility, the full responsibility, as per international resolutions and international provisions, to protect civilians under its military occupation. What we have seen over the last month, as we have been seeing over a 75-year period, Israel deliberately targets civilians. This is a military doctrine in Israel. Whenever there is such a confrontation, they go after the civilians, they go after the civil structures, and the doctrine goes like, once they terrorize the civilians, they would pressure the fighters. And the UN has provided shelters for the Palestinian people in Gaza over the last month, but Israel has been bombarding these shelters. I met senior UN officials the last couple of days, and they give me an unimaginable account of what is happening in their shelters. They have no fuel for their trucks to bring water or electricity. Diseases are spreading, and the situation is simply horrific in every sense. So we must stop here blaming the victims all the time, and we must stop finding excuses for the Israeli atrocious, murderous attacks against innocent people that has been reported all over the world, including your own channel. What is happening is crimes against humanity. What is happening is tantamount to genocide. And now what we need is first to ceasefire, to immediate ceasefire, to stop the aggression against our people. We need to think about how do we exchange hostages and relieve people. We need to think about a huge, massive humanitarian aid and assistance corridors from all over the world, including from our brothers and sisters in India, to elevate the unprecedented human suffering in Gaza caused